Hello? Testing. Laurent, can you hear me? One, two. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Check. 1, 2. 1, 2. Laurent? Hello? Hello? Yes, how are you doing? On what? Oh yeah. Yeah? Richard? Thanks for the hi, go man, thanks very much. Bye bye. Dave? Is he? Hello? Laurent, can you hear me? Laurent, give us a thumbs up if you can hear me. All good in the room here anyway. Any movement there? There's about a 5 or 6 second delay. Yeah. Okay. That's on the self view, yeah? Yeah. Laurent, can you hear me? It's what?
Yes, we can hear you and see you well. Everything is okay from our side. Can you hear us? Yes, we can hear you and see you well.
One, two, 1, 2. Laurent, can you hear me? One, two, Laurent. Back to me. He must be, No, because I was trying to get him to give me the thumbs up on the video. So that's. No, I was just trying, but I had him on the camera. I was just trying to give me a thumbs up. Okay. Listen, we have my number anyway, so we need to shut down. We're just going to leave as it is. Yeah. Hi, Carl.
Just in time. Can you please be seated? Good morning, everyone. Friends of the OECD LEAD program, this is the ninth edition of this forum on partnerships and local governance, and we are very pleased to be here in Dublin. Dublin has been, and Ireland has been, a pioneer in the field of local partnership since the creation of the County Enterprise Board back 20 years ago. And Ireland has played a very important role within the European Union and the world in showing the way on how to engage local communities. And this is why we are very privileged to be here today and to get inspiration facing these difficult times, inspiration from Ireland again. And this is why we are very keen to listen to you, Minister Richard Bruton. We know that you have a large experience in government, and you are very close to the problems of the empowerment of people in the response to the crisis. So I welcome you, and I give you the floor.
Well, thanks very much indeed. First of all, I should say, unfortunately, more of my experience is in opposition than in government, but that's another day's work. No, I'd like to, first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to say a few words at the opening of your conference. And obviously, my expertise is probably going to be in Ireland, so you'll forgive me for just talking about our own experience, and maybe that will be of some interest to you. Ireland, as you know, is an economy in huge transition. In the middle of for the early part of the 2000s, an economic model was built that was simply unsustainable. Huge expansion in banking, funding a big property development bubble, both in terms of a hugely exaggerated construction sector, a big bubble in property prices, and that collapsed spectacularly when the financial crisis bore in. The impact on the Irish economy was severe. In employment terms, 16% reduction in employment, a massive reduction in the number of people at work, as you can see. In public sector terms, the collapse of the tax base resulted in spending being about 50% higher than the tax base when we entered government. And obviously, you know about the banking system, where an enormous hole arose which wiped out shareholder value, involved the state putting in 64 billion of resources in to prop up the banks, and creating NAMA, a rescue, an asset recovery body which the state is managing. So it was what you might call an earthquake. And I suppose the determination of government, I think, which is an important decision, that after an earthquake you don't seek to rebuild over the same fault lines. That would be the fatal mistake. So there is a huge shift in policy and strategy being undertaken by government right across a range of areas that impact on economy and governance. The first, I suppose, is the obvious one, to shift from an economy built on construction and debt and property to one founded on enterprise, innovation and exports, the only long-term reliable base for a small open economy. And we have made a lot of changes centred in a strategy which we call the Action Plan for Jobs, in order to make that transition. It has focused on a number of areas, clearly improving the supports to our companies to build more innovative export orientation has been an important theme. repairing access to finance, which, as you can imagine, has collapsed in many parts of the spectrum needed to fund new business. So the government has, for example, introduced microfinance, loan guarantees, development capital funds, innovation funds, in total coming to something around $2.5 billion worth of funds that have been sponsored by government to complement the reform that is happening in our banking system, to make them more oriented on small business. There has also been an identification of what are the sectors that 5-10 years ahead can deliver economic success. As you probably know, most of our enterprise strategies are driven by national bodies. We have a very strong international investment agency known as the IDA. We have a really well-developed indigenous, if you like, Irish company support agency in Enterprise Ireland that does seed capital, it does management development, it does innovation funds, and it has export offices overseas. We also have the enterprise boards, which are now evolving, and these are locally based, 35 of them in all, largely one in each local authority area. And they are now being evolved to move from, if you like, standalone boards at local level, moving them into the local authority, so they're going to be more an integrated part of the local authority, but also having a stronger service level agreement from a centre of excellence established nationally. So this is a new model, I suppose, we're evolving to try and make start up an enterprise development at local level, located within the local authority, but working in a creative way with strategies evolved at national level. That's one if you like, block of policy, which is a major reform. The other major reform that is going on in Ireland is to move from a welfare system that was largely the qualification for welfare support was largely idleness, that you weren't doing anything, and conditions of support was that you were, out of work and inactive, to one that is much more oriented towards developing people, an active labour market policy. And that has involved a huge shift within the Department of Social Protection to create local offices that are working with people, interviewing them at certain stages after they become unemployed, seeking to fit them into a range of new programs that have been developed, work experience programs, mixture of skill on and off the job programs, conversion programs, or for education, where many people, if you suppose, educated in the construction and related sectors are now being re-educated to sectors of the future. That again is being driven largely within a national body, the Department of Social Protection, but through their local office network. That wouldn't have traditionally very close connections with local governance, but it has its own local models of delivery. And many of the partnership companies which you referred to, which I suppose were an innovation, which are local bodies, I think which have a broad remit, largely around disadvantage, either rural or urban disadvantage, and have a broad remit. And they have been very successful, much more experimental. So we have a strange mix, I suppose, in Ireland of strong national agencies with local offices, with local authorities having a very narrow remit compared to most European countries. Very small remit in areas like education. Our training has predominantly been national, though some of it has been local. The other big pressure, I suppose, or change that's going on is obviously the consolidation of our public finances, and that has also had an impact, I suppose, on the structure of government. There is a big effort to consolidate and to reduce the number of agencies that we operate, and to restructure organisation in that way. For example, one of the biggest ones is in the whole training area, where we had previously a very large national body responsible both for training and employment services. That has been broken up, with the employment services going to the welfare department, which is, I suppose, consistent with a more active labour market policy within the income support department of the social protection, and the training element going to education. And I think the challenge now is how will that restructuring work? There is a restructuring going on where the local bodies known as the vocational education committees, their number will be reduced to 16. They've traditionally been in the space, I suppose, technical education at second level and further education after you leave school, short of third level degree or diploma. It's been a fairly narrow area that they've been involved in, but they're taking on responsibility for the whole training budget. So a merged sector is being evolved now that covers training, some parts of the technical education system and further education. I think unlike, say, Germany and Austria and countries like those, we don't have the very evolved tradition of employers having apprenticeship models. The apprenticeship system is very narrow in Ireland, was largely dominated by the construction sector, and as a result of the collapse of the construction sector, the apprenticeship sector has largely collapsed as well. So we are in a position, I suppose, of needing now to evolve new training models more closely aligned to the sort of model that you have in Germany and Austria and others, where you seek to build a much closer bonds between education delivery at local level and business, the business needs, bringing business in, to redesign some of the curricula, but also to make a commitment to providing off-the-job training places for those who are engaged, to create more practical, hands-on experience. So I suppose in short, we are undergoing a very rapid transition with a lot of things happening at the one time in Ireland. And they've been largely driven from national level. If you like, this transition shift has been, I suppose, designed and is being driven from national level. And that does create something of a dilemma between empowering local governance to shape new regional strategies that's appropriate to their competitive advantage, if you like, and the need to drive a national policy that identifies, the important sectors for the future, the shifts in policy we have to make, the way in which we're going to support enterprise, the types of instruments we'll use. And I think there is a difficult evolution now of the role of local government happening in Ireland. And I think in many ways the local enterprise offices, which are under policy, they have traditionally been under my department. We are now evolving them. They are going to move into local governance, but under a service level agreement with Enterprise Ireland, one of the national bodies that I'm responsible for. So it's a new model where I suppose we're trying to have a service level agreement so that we see delivery standards and seek to drive national innovation, new policy instruments, and seeking to marry that at the same time with local initiative, local networking, local excellence. So we are trying to evolve funding models that would be flexible, that would reward those who are more innovative, that would encourage networking, that would encourage building alliances with business and other agencies. So I think that we are in I think it's a difficult period where obviously there are huge national priorities. We must make the shift to exports, to job creation. We must make the shift to hit our fiscal targets. We must consolidate and make smaller government. And at the same time, we have to find a way of working with local government at a time when, I suppose, nationally we're undertaking a massive shift in policy. I think that does pose dilemmas, and I think you'll hear from the Minister for Local Government as to how he's seeking to reshape the ambition and role of local government to fit in with this very sharp shift in policy that's occurring in Ireland. I suppose just to say on the positive side, we are making, I think, very solid progress in respect of this shift that's going on. In fiscal strategy, we are hitting all our targets. We're now back into the borrowing markets and able to borrow long-term 10-year money at something like 4.15 we issued bonds, so that's as good as we were achieving in 2005. On employment, we have had a very strong export-led recovery. It has, for the first time in the last 2 quarters, seen employment nationally grow. But beneath that, you can see private sector employment has been growing for about 15 months, whereas public sector continues to decline with fiscal consolidation. In the banking system, we've also made solid progress, but there remains problems of working out, distressed loan books, distressed mortgages, businesses that are in stress. But overall, we have now a big balance of payments surplus, so as a nation, we're paying back down our debt. And I think the challenge for us is to continue to reform governance, both local and national, to deliver more effectively with less resources, and that is the challenge that I suppose Irish government, local and national, is working under. I think in terms of your own evaluation of the role of the model for local government, ours doesn't fit neatly into an ideal model of local governance. On the other hand, as the Kerryman would, we make jokes about Kerrymen as part of the country, and when the Kerryman is asked, well, how would you get from Kerry to Dublin, their typical answer would be, well, I wouldn't start out from here. It would be the answer they would give to you. And I think there is an element of that in Ireland. The model of local governance that we have developed over the last, 100 years, probably doesn't fit very well into the OECD model of the ideal model. But the issue is, how do you, starting out from where we're starting, evolve a model that's more locally responsive, better at creating regional strategies based on competitive strengths, and at the same time is consistent with a major national shift in policy that's occurring across so many dimensions of governance. So those are a few thoughts, not very well, maybe don't cohere exactly, but it gives you some impression of the journey that Ireland is taking at the moment, and I suppose the structure into which we're seeking to fit employment strategies locally, placement strategies for the disadvantaged and unemployed. It is a difficult environment where we're seeking to build new models and build new networks that perhaps have been weak in the past in Ireland. And I think as I said at the start, the construction, in many ways, I've heard it likened in the US that it was like a bit of a drug in a way, in that construction solved all problems. It was very good at distributing income across areas that were traditionally disadvantaged. People with lower skills could be easily integrated into the construction sector. It created a great golden goose laying eggs in terms of tax revenue. It gave everyone a sense that they were party to development, but it was ultimately unsustainable. And that I think we've learnt in this crisis, that seeking to build, as they did in the States as well as here, to build a long-term strategy on construction is a highly dangerous approach, and we have to shift away from that. So thanks very much for the opportunity to I hope you have a very successful conference. Your topics look really challenging. They're absolutely central to what is happening right across Europe at the moment. This is the context why we are introducing a youth guarantee and seeking to evolve a better response. As I heard President Barroso say at the very start of the Irish presidency, that in many ways Europe is on trial as to whether it can be credible with its citizens to respond to what is an enormous crisis. And there is a great sense of urgency, I think, right across Europe to build a strong economic model that can withstand the pressures that the system is coming under at this stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Bruton, for your words. You actually met our expectations, because we at the OECD today, we are engaged in the implementation of what we call the skills strategy. We think that skills upgrading, improving the way in which the education and training programs are articulated at local level. It's in the local labour market is crucial. And you mentioned that FAS has been a major undertaking by the government to restructure the national training agency. And what you said is what many other countries should do, is to engage more on an apprenticeship system much similar to the one that Germany and the German-like countries have, because those countries don't have serious youth unemployment. And the issue that the Secretary General wants to put at for the next Ministerial is precisely the way to tackle youth unemployment. And that, I think, what you said goes exactly in the direction in which the OECD is moving to, and we know that you have other commitments. We are very grateful for the fact that you have taken time to be with us this morning to open this conference, and we are very grateful. Thank you so much. And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you the Deputy Secretary General of the OECD, Yves Leterme. You know, Yves Leterme is from Belgium. He has been Prime Minister of Belgium. And to what Robert Strauss and everybody is saying, that he managed to run the best ever presidency of the European Union. So since this event takes place within the framework of the European Union, we are also getting inspiration from Mr. Yves Leterme on how to make a presidency, EU presidency, a state-of-the-art event. The floor is yours, Yves.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sergio and Mr. Strauss. I can imagine that you have something to ask me later on the day, being so your so kind words about the Belgian EU presidency. Dear Sergio, Mr. Strauss, dear participants, it is of course a great pleasure for me to welcome you here in Ireland, in Dublin. In the weekend I was in Belgium and it was still full of snow, so here we have not that much snow until now. Maybe it's spring is coming here in Dublin. So welcome at the 9th annual meeting of the OECD Forum on Partnerships and Local Governance, the OECD's worldwide network of local development practitioners. I would like to thank, of course, the Irish friends for their hospitality and commend the Irish government for the excellent European Union presidency so far. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to learn from each other on how to support growth and how to put in place more and better jobs, a pressing, of course, and difficult political agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, this event, this forum, comes only a couple of weeks after the release of our what we call flagship report, our annual flagship report, Going for Growth. And our recent report, ladies and gentlemen, indicates that, as we are speaking, that the likelihoods, on the one hand, the likelihood of a worst-case scenario has receded, but that on the other hand, the road to a strong and balanced recovery is still fraught with many challenges. Growth prospects in the whole of the Eurozone and the whole of the European Union, and even in the whole of the world, remain fragile, and downside risks still prevail. Global current account imbalances, which at the beginning contributed to the crisis, have narrowed, but it is still not clear how much of the recent adjustment in, for instance, the balances will be sustained as we go forward during the next months. And national governments pursue structural reforms with the aim to restore competitiveness and fiscal sustainability of course, conditions for a return to a healthy post-crisis growth path. Ladies and gentlemen, today all of the G20 economies and all of the OECD member states face really acute domestic challenges, starting with the number one, the job market legacy of the crisis. In 2013, today in the OECD area alone, near to 20 million people have been unemployed for more than 1 year, and nearly 10 million young people or so-called NEETs, neither in employment nor in education or training. And so in lots of countries, the risk of seeing a sizable share of youth lose any kind of attachment to the labour market is all too real, with, of course, the dire economic but also social consequences and even political consequences. Ladies and gentlemen, the new policy priorities we have identified reflect the need to, on the one hand, cushion the impact of job losses in the short term, but also to facilitate the return to work before unemployment becomes entrenched. And one of the most notable changes compared that we have noted is in the national policies is a marked increase in the priority given to the policies dealing with social benefits and labour market activation. Dear colleagues, major trends and forces in the global economy are signalling important changes in the context of your work, the context for local development over the next decade. Increasing global economic integration and the growth of the newer markets are changing the geography of flows of capital, of flows of firms, jobs and knowledge exchange. And the changes, on the other hand, in financial systems call for new ways to capitalize on local infrastructures and development. And in the current context of tight consumer credit, economic development and urban regeneration need to focus more on productive activity and not rely too much on more traditional sectors like leisure and retail activity to spur redevelopment. Ladies and gentlemen, retaining jobs and investment will be as important in the future as attracting new jobs and investment. That will be the case for many years of this new cycle. And these challenges need to be addressed in the context of shrinking public budgets. After highly expansionary fiscal policies, today, as said before, many countries have switched to the tightest ones in decades. And it is indeed at the local level, at the level of local economies and local communities, that the effects of these policies are felt most. Local tax revenues, on the one hand, have decreased, and central government transfers drastically reduced, and on the other hand, the demand for social services has been rising. In this context, local administration, municipalities, regional agencies, economic development agencies, employment services, training institutions, local partnerships are faced with the challenge of so-called doing more with less, which is easier said than done. So public investment needs to be smart and it needs to be integrated. Indeed, we need to think laterally about how actions in one area, for instance, economic development, can have simultaneous benefits in others, such as creating new jobs and better support social inclusion. We indeed need to pool resources and reduce transaction costs by building social capital and local networks. And we need to build more flexibility into our policy delivery so that local public agencies can better problem solve together and stimulate new innovative ways of working from the bottom up. And we need to ensure that new businesses have the right spaces and the right financial mechanisms to start up and to grow. And we need to create incentives for private investment to take on board social and employment objectives. Ladies and gentlemen, it is on this particular aspect that our program, that the OECD LEAD program, really your work, really can make a useful contribution. Boosting jobs in challenging times. This was the raison d'être, the start of the OECD LEAD program created 30 years ago in 1982, when it became apparent that macroeconomic policies alone are not eradicating sustainably persistent levels of unemployment. It is, I think, important to emphasize, as LEAD has done for many years, that if you want local approaches to work, to really sort effect and to create more and better jobs, it is not enough to work at the local level. The national level also needs to adapt and contribute, as was said also by Minister Bruton. And this is why national governments, why OECD national governments need LEAD. LEAD is indeed the only international body which provides guidance on how national policy can facilitate effective policy implementation on the ground. Indeed, our network LEAD advises governments on how to put in place effective local development delivery systems, on what is the optimal level of flexibility in the management of programs that leads to better employment outcomes, and the network also informs us on what are the management aspects that can be carried out best and at which level. It shows how governments can do more with less, with breaking down the so-called policy silos. And this, today, we think is one of the greatest, most important priorities for OECD countries. In difficult fiscal environments, indeed, no governments can afford to work in silos, to waste money and to miss opportunities. Governments should use taxpayers' money in a responsible way and, of course, take as much as possible a so-called whole-of-government approach. Ladies and gentlemen, we think it is extremely valuable to have you here, to have this forum meeting in Ireland, a country which was one of the first to experiment, as Sergio said, with local partnership approaches, and whose experience in this area has inspired many other countries in Europe and all over the world. Indeed, the Irish economy was hit by a severe crisis. After over a decade of strong growth that propelled this country to the fourth highest level of GDP per capita in the OECD. Since 2008, since nearly 5 years, the government of Ireland has carried out a very sizable fiscal consolidation, and today, happily, the recovery is in sight. And as was said, explained by Mr. Bruton, in response to the crisis, significant institutional reforms are underway in this country. And we as an OECD here in this country are working with departments of the environment, community and local government, the Department of Social Protection, the Department of Children and Youth Affairs and POBAL to resort this reform agenda and strengthen local development delivery systems, to advise on what employment and trading agencies could do to support local job creation and to facilitate the emergence of local youth employment strategies. Ladies and gentlemen, to sum up, I think this forum, your forum, is really worldwide unique in bringing together and bringing to the OECD the voice of local development practitioners. Local development practitioners from all of the public, private and civil society sectors. And the forum is truly international, of course, as reflected by today's attendance with even people coming from Australia and the United States. And this would not have been possible without the commitment of lots of people, especially of the European Commission, DG Employment and Social Affairs, and of the many governments, including Ireland. All these people have supported the forum to reinforce the quality of implementation and practice in their country and helped us to bring together this meeting. So I conclude in looking forward to learning from you and to learn from each other, to learn from best practices in all of your countries, and I wish you a very fruitful stay here in Dublin, a very fruitful 9th annual meeting of our forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yves. You are somehow new to the LEAD program, but you have understood well what it's all about. It's about the implementation of policies. The OECD has a number of committees on employment, education, but what LEAD does is looks at how the policies actually are implemented in the field. And this is the peculiar nature of this program within the OECD. But this program has always had from the beginning a big brother, a big ally, a big partner, which is the European Commission. And Robert Strauss has, as a delegate to the LEAD program, has given a particular impulsion to this collaboration, the partnership between the OECD and the European Commission in this field, because also the European Commission understands that looking at how actually things work at local level is so important. So we are very pleased to have you here, Robert, and I'm glad to give you the floor.
So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for those kind words, Sergio. If I was to repeat Mr. Leterme's opening words, you must want something from me later on if you're so full of praise for the European Commission. But the Commission has always warmly worked together with the OECD, and I'm just continuing a tradition where we believe the work of the LEAD programme is important and useful. Like previous speakers, I too would like to thank the Irish for hosting this particular forum. I think it's particularly appropriate. Not only does Ireland have the presidency, that's been said by many, of the European Union, but Ireland was one of those countries hardest hit by the crisis. But Ireland seems to be one of the countries which is really emerging. I mean, Minister Bruton gave you the sort of the macro figures, that exports are up, employment looks a bit better. But seen from the ground, it also seems that this is really happening. I was here in January for a meeting and was talking to the taxi driver, and he said, yes, things are at last turning a corner. People were spending more money. And coming in from the airport last night, I deliberately asked the taxi driver, do you too share this view that things are getting better? And he said yes. So Ireland really does feel that the corner is being turned. Whether it's entirely due to the programme that the European Commission, European Central Bank and IMF imposed on Ireland, whether it's despite the programme, I won't go into. But clearly the major reason why the Irish economy has recovered is due to Ireland. I mean, without a major commitment by the government, by local authorities, by the people, the recovery would not be happening. So all praise to Ireland. And I think the success, the apparent success of the Irish recovery certainly has lessons for all of us. I mean, both previous speakers mentioned that Ireland has a long tradition of partnerships at different levels. Partnerships have certainly played their role in the rebuilding of the Irish economy after the earthquake, as Mr. Leterme mentioned. I've heard the expression meltdown. Meltdown is less good a metaphor for rebuilding after a meltdown, but you in any case, you can rebuild. You don't want to have the same structure as you had before, neither for an earthquake nor for a meltdown. You need a different structure, you need a different policy, and Ireland clearly has this. But the partnerships of different forms, the appropriate sorts of partnerships, I'm sure is a model that Ireland is going to retain, possibly attuned for the new situation, surely attuned for the new situation, but partnership remains a vital way forward. I've noticed in the programme that youth has a prominent role. This is right and proper. Mr. Leterme mentioned that President Barroso, the Commission President, has made youth employment or youth unemployment one of the key priorities of the Commission. It has been, it remains one of the key priorities. Those of you in Europe, in any case, will probably have followed the discussions on the budget. Not very easy discussions on the budget. A number of member states certainly didn't want any increase at all. They actually wanted a cut. But there's one area where there was unanimous agreement that more money should be found. And this area is to fight youth unemployment and ungainful inactivity. I mean, the NEETs, those who are neither in education, training or in employment, are the target for a new programme, the Youth Opportunities and Youth Employment Package. €6 billion has been found in a time of fiscal austerity. It's a lot of money. It's not a huge amount of money if you think that there are 7.5 million NEETs in Europe who need financial support, training, better education, etc. But it is a lot of money, particularly in a period of fiscal austerity. Member States last February, at the end of February at the European Council, decided that €6 billion would be available to be spent over the next 7 years. That's just under €1 billion a year. I'm sure some, if not many of you involved in local initiatives, local programming, those who look after European Social Fund projects, for example, will be seeing part of that money coming in your direction if you are fighting youth unemployment. So there are more resources available. We tend to say you have to do more with less. Well, in the area of youth unemployment, there is a little more. So you have to do more with a little more. You have to do a lot more with a little more, rather than do more with less. But that, I think, is perhaps some welcome news for those of you and those of us who are trying to confront this very, very serious problem, one which risks, a lost generation. It's a problem particularly severe in the European Union, but it's not only the European Union where youth unemployment is an issue. I hope that our friends from the US and from Australia who are here, they don't face the same sort of horrendous levels of 55% youth unemployment, which is the rate in Greece or in Spain. But youth unemployment is an overall problem. The OECD has made it one of the key aspects, and the G20 also fight youth unemployment as one of their key issues. So the focus today on youth unemployment, it's not the only focus, but I think is very welcome. The European Union certainly is very happy to see this. And overall, the conference, I'm sure, will allow all of us to go away with a better understanding of how Ireland is addressing it, because each of the workshops has very interesting Irish presentations. But I'm sure the Ireland will also be able to learn from us. I mean, one of the advantages of hosting one of these conferences is that a large percentage of the population, of course, comes from the local area. Ireland is emerging from the crisis. The partnerships have been part of the answer, but in no way can Ireland or any other country rest on its laurels. Work has to continue. New ways of doing things have to be agreed, and by Ireland presenting its practices and being confronted with questions and discussions, I'm sure Ireland will also learn just as all of us. So I think we have a very interesting 2 days ahead of us, and I'm sure we will have a very good time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for the good news that there are €6 billion that have been made available for tackling youth unemployment. This is indeed a good news in this difficult financial context, and in that sense, it's also important for us as OECD, as partners of the European Commission, to know that President Barroso has given this sense of leadership to the response to this, which is actually the most pressing problem in OECD countries. But we have not to forget that there are countries where youth unemployment is absolutely dramatic, and countries where youth unemployment is not such a problem. And then we have to reflect, as Minister Bruton said, on why there is such a spread, because this difference is generated in the way in which public policies for education and training are structured. So I think that there is a lot of food for thought, And with that, with these opening speeches, thanking Mr. Leterme, Minister Bruton, Bob Strauss, we can end up this opening session and give the floor to the first panel, and I will call Sylvain Giguère to take my place here.
Good morning, everybody. So my name is Sylvain Giguère, and I will moderate the next session. So, as we have heard, we set up this forum on partnerships 9 years ago as a network for practitioners, a platform where people working at the local level on economic development, employment, or social development could come and share their experience on how to do things better locally. So how to design more effective strategies, supporting more innovative projects, combine government programs with local initiatives, and so on, build stronger partnerships. Now what we have seen is that over the years, increasingly, and perhaps since the crisis even more, the forum, and especially its annual meeting, has been attended by representatives from central government. Now, I guess this is this reflects an interest from central government perspectives to hear and listen from practitioners on how to make policies more effective by improving the implementation. What are the obstacles in the implementations? What are the opportunities? And also, perhaps, there's an interest for central government representatives, government departments, to come and also share among themselves their experience in making their policies and programs more flexible, more adaptable, easier to coordinate together and to combine with the local initiatives. So as we have just heard, we cannot afford anymore to work in silos. We have to do more with less, or a lot more with a little more. And but at the same time, there is a tendency still to think that policies implemented in silos will be more effective, or at least more cost efficient. So it's not an easy issue, and that's why the forum exists. It's because we haven't found the magic wand to solve this problem. How to address and solve this trade-off between effective policy delivery and at the same time local innovation and creativity at the local level. And Minister Bruton expressed well this trade-off that Ireland is trying to solve at the moment. So we need to talk about concepts like mutual accountability at the local level, horizontally between partners, to compensate perhaps for a loss of vertical accountability. We need to talk about leadership, capacities, the evidence base that is needed to take sound decisions at the local level. So these are the issues that we are talking about and that we will be talking about over the next 2 days. We can't find solutions just with this meeting, but it's a long-term goal of the forum to make progress on these. And we hope that we will be able to make progress with this first plenary session. We have a great team of experts with experience at dealing with national policy implementation and also working at the local level, local government, local development level, on both the economic development side of the equation and the human resource development side of the equation. And we'll start this morning with the economic development side. We have with us Ed Blakely, professor at the University of Sydney, an expert of local development, urban regeneration, spatial planning, disaster recovery, so it can be helpful sometimes. And we will build on that and complement with my colleague Deborah Manfred from the OECD, an expert on local economic leadership, actually, and local development systems. Baron Franco, a practitioner, a very successful practitioner from Manchester, will join us. It's been delayed by the snow, so hopefully we'll make it on time. And then I will introduce to you in an hour or so the second part of our panel, who will deal with labor market policy and how to make sure that it can be efficient at the same time as it pursues long-term goals at the local level, which can help to build better quality jobs at the same time as it helps to build competitiveness and productivity in the economy. So with this, let's start with Ed, please.
I think these are not my slides. Are my slides up? There we go. I'm delighted to be here in Ireland. Like Mr. Obama, I have Irish roots. At least my name is Blakely, not Obama. So the proof of my Irish roots are in my name. This is indeed a pleasure because many of you are practicing local economic development. And local economic development, when I started in this field in the late 70s and early 80s, was not a field of importance. At that time, when I wrote my first book in local economic development, all economic development was national or state because we dealt with large firms. And the goal of local economic development and the practice of local economic development was to attract a firm to your community. And Ireland certainly did better than most places in that regard, attracting large American firms as a platform into Europe. That first book suggested that local economic development should be more than that. It should build on the indigenous capacities of nations, that what you had, whatever that resource was, even if it were mountains and deserts and so on, could be a resource from which you build the economy rather than a resource for the economy, if you understand the difference. That putting a firm on a nice resource, using the water, is one thing. On the other hand, you can turn it around and say this water is so valuable, like Fiji, we can sell it to the rest of the world. Versus a firm that monopolizes the water to make wool or whatever. So the first book was about using those resources. And there were three principal resources, and they will continue to be the theme of my speech. The first resource is the human resource. That many communities today view their human resources, as we talked about, the unemployed youth, a very important human resource. But there's another resource that LEAD is interested in, and that is the resource with the silver hair. We are losing a lot of valuable resources, and we could couple those valuable resources with some of the youth and create new resources. And I will give some examples in my talk. In 3 weeks, I will be 75 years old. Now, some of you will say, like my children, I don't look it. But I used to. So the second edition of my book was on innovation, the Silicon Valleys, and so on. And one noted almost immediately that local economic development sprang from certain places, Route 128 in Boston, Silicon Valley, and so on. And many other places tried to emulate that by putting in a tech park. My colleagues in the United States know we put in some 3,000 or 4,000 tech parks. But only 100 or 200 of them were successful because we started at the wrong end. We did not start with the notion that we have human beings here and natural resources, but we start at the end that somehow the tech park would create jobs, rather than saying the people will create jobs, and if a tech park is needed, it will come from that process. So the investment in the second book was about how to invest in the human resources and the physical resources to create new technology jobs. And later on, I'll talk about this because now that I'm in the disaster business, having dealt with several disasters, the most important thing in recovery is not to recover the old industries, but to position yourself for the future. And even the fact that you had a disaster may create, as we did in New Orleans, new job and new job opportunities for people on how to protect other places from similar disasters. So you use even a bad event for new purposes, to be innovative. The third of the book, because we were then moving into the late 90s, was globalization. That everything was global. Everything came from China or went to China. And by that time I was living in Australia and felt the brunt of that, where we in Australia were providing much in the way of our natural resources to other places. But while we did that, we had places and pockets in Australia that formerly were very strong, like Wollongong and so on, that were losing out in the competition with the Chinese steel. A former Newcastle and other places that produce steel were now sending the basic resources to China. So what we had to do was to rethink globally, how do we take those natural resources and make some new resource that is competitive, not in the large sense, but a more boutique sense. So how do we make a finished product that is better in the globe than try to compete in a mass-produced product? How do we break down big firms into smaller firms that are more competitive so that they can compete across the globe, but from that local space? And the fourth edition, which has just been finished, we're starting our fifth edition, is about creating great places. Because all the research that I've looked at around the world, and I'm finishing a book now, shows that good places are what they call sticky. That jobs stick in good places. The economy can change enormously, like Portland, Oregon. But people don't leave. They like the place. So what is their response? To create new opportunities in that place rather than to leave it. The University of California at Berkeley, where I spent 26 years, 80% of all the students who come to Berkeley remain in the Bay Area. And what do? They create jobs. And even now, in a dire recession in the United States, South of Market is booming, creating new jobs in the gaming and other industries. And most of those graduates from Stanford and Berkeley are not looking for jobs, they're creating jobs. So great places, cities, or a network of communities that act and look like a city are the new incubators for work. They are not the places where work comes to, they're places where work grows from. So these are our resources, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can penetrate the entire world using these resources to create new opportunities and become part of a global network and not just a local network. And this is where we are now, that places are the most important thing. And the economic development concepts that come from that are based on three very key and important things. Diversity. That a place used to be identified like Detroit with the automobile. Detroit now has a very robust economy, but it's in all kinds of technology and technology development. In spite of the center of the city falling apart, the Detroit economy is doing quite well. Pittsburgh, very similar. The economies of the greater Pittsburgh are doing quite well because they have a series of small firms strategically located in the global marketplace. But this calls for a new partnership. The old partnership was a partnership where the city, in a public-private partnership, would lend money or other resources for space to attract a firm. And many American cities were very good at this, giving away huge amounts of resources, land and other resources for a firm. The new partnership is going into business to create business. Many places like Boulder, Colorado, and so on, and I'll show you examples later, are finding small firms in old shopping centers, creating the incubator space for new industries and partnering with those firms, like in Emeryville, California, where the equity of the firm and the rent structure are such a way that the city benefits from the creation of firms versus just the mere location of firms. So diverse economies are from this new partnership. But there's another partnership that many of us have to learn how to live with and deal with. I was quite surprised, and I'm going to be very impolitic. The Prime Minister of Great Britain is saying that people who come to his country, if they haven't been there 2 or 3 years, cannot have housing, social housing. I want to go to all those people and say, come to Australia. Because we'll give you housing because you're the very people that create our new jobs. You're not the people who are taking jobs, you're the creators of jobs. Whenever you say no to someone, you said no to everyone. If you don't create equity and equality, you create discord. And when you create discord, you have an unsafe place. And unsafe places cannot generate jobs. So, multiculturalism, pluralism is more important than internationalism. Tokyo is an international city, but it's certainly not multicultural. So it's easy to understand the dimension I'm talking about is where people blend together in such a way that they feel safe and secure to create. And that's what Google is. That's what many of the new firms in California are. And the last is, let's stop looking for jobs for our youth. Let's start helping them create jobs for themselves. And I'll spend a lot more time on that. So the new basic rationale is to deal with the indigenous capacity to build a new network of firms within your locality that are diverse across the spectrum that reduce social inequality. And as we do that, we create a competitive place. This is New Orleans after the storm. With me, with the members of the city council, we rode bicycles around the city to identify the nodes in which we could get the city restarted. The city council said we should restart the entire city. Every piece of ground should be rebuilt. But calmer heads prevailed and said, there are certain nodes here. They've been here for a long time. We have a music node. We have a food node. We have a new nodes for other kinds of economic activity. Let's build the city based on those nodes. Let's not go back to the past where the factory dominated the future. Let's move to the future where we create the business. Let's not go back to the revitalization, but to the reverse and the repositioning. These 3 photos here are illustrations of that. The big shopping center is now inside this building a whole series of small new stores. Created with local enterprise and local development. New stores, new opportunities, new theaters based on local capacity. And that's what we should be looking for. And so we take the human skill here. This is in Boulder, Colorado, where young people and others, rather than tearing down buildings, they're taking them apart piece by piece, saving the old parts and so on, taking photos of them and the like, selling them on the internet to someone who needs a door for a 19th century building. So taking the past and creating the future, using the internet is a new way of generating new jobs and new human capacity. And making sure that this has a chance for everyone, no matter where they're located spatially. So this indigenous capacity is important. And some people are railing against the banks and things like this. Let's not talking about what we're against, let's start talking about what we're for. A stronger, spatial, equal economy where the ed and the med come together. In New Orleans, we will be building the largest medical complex after the storm in the South. Why not choose music? Because New Orleans has what I call an interesting bit of historic magnet infrastructure. New Orleans used to be the central place for South American medical needs. So New Orleans is going to reposition itself in the globe as a place for medical education and development, because it can deal with some of the social issues of inequality by incorporating the African American population in the medical industries. And next to this med center is a biotech incubator to incubate the new industries. So this piece of magnet infrastructure creates the ability with it and within it to grow out new jobs. So in the new partnership, the city, the state, are working with the medical industry not just to save lives with the people who are coming there for hospitalization, but while we're doing that, what kind of new products can we produce? Prosthesis products, new medicines, new drugs, and so forth, and creating new industries from the medical industry and merging the medical and education industries together to create new jobs and new job opportunities. And we have to do this on a regional basis. A city by itself is not enough. This must be regional, combining all the resources you have in the region so you can deal with the urban revitalization zones across the region. Because having an inequality place someplace leads to inequality other places. So regenerating these places becomes a goal in itself. To regenerate that space is a new goal. And after Sandy in New York, a lot of places that were underutilized are not going to be utilized because they're outside of the flood zone. So here's an economic opportunity that was created by a flood. And the city is becoming an active partner in the regeneration of this space. So cities have to be positive and aggressive in the regeneration of space, creating opportunities for people rather than hoping for opportunities. It has to make investments, usually with space, but sometimes with its own dollars. Its only superannuation fund, as we've done in some places, are now making large investments in local firms. This is what we did in New Orleans, the zones that we created to recreate a better space, an economically more vital space, and using local culture. Local culture can be an export, particularly in a digital age. We're losing a lot of local culture. The problem with international travel now is it all looks about the same. But those places that we go to that are unique, that are interesting, that are preserved spaces, are the spaces we want to see. The celebrations of the local are the things we want to do. So now with the internet, young people can be involved, and I've seen it in many places, in creating new enterprises around the cultures, digital things, songs, music, and things like this, so that they too can create work. And the modern art and other avenues in Buffalo are now becoming incubators for new economic opportunities. This comes from, I believe, Turkestan in Boulder, Colorado. The people there assembled it there, and people said, well, what is this? Will anybody come to it? It is now extremely popular, and it is creating a magnet for people around the region, far away, coming to this locale for tea and celebrating the past to make a future. So the local landscape is a landscape for job creation, creating from junk. This junk is now street art that young people are creating and exporting around the United States. So let's look for those opportunities where we can couple with them and create new job opportunities from their artistic sense and their artistic backgrounds and interests. I won't go through this, but the object here is to start thinking of ourselves as investors in innovation versus the receivers of jobs. And here's an example of what I call the flexi space. The cities should not develop tech parks, but flexi space where new jobs can be created and generated, providing them support and networking them together so they can export together, providing the big computer capacity and so forth that they can't get on their own, putting some of the older citizens with them so that they can create new jobs, new opportunities internally. And I'm sure in this workshop we will share many such ideas that are already abroad. But we can't look to someone else to make jobs. We have to make them. And then making sure the university is a real collaborator. That the university can bring its talents, its capacities to help create jobs and not merely the place where people learn about jobs. I've seen some really interesting programs. One where the students spend the first year 3/4 of the time in the university, and every student has a firm that they're working with. The other quarter of the time they're with a firm. And they must build, by the end of the third year, a new business plan for the firm to expand and to attract new resources. So the student's final project is this business plan. But the business person who has the student in the firm must come to school at least once a month to hear lectures on the best and most innovative business practices. So here everyone is benefiting. The firm is benefiting, the student is benefiting, and in the end, the student now is connected with business. University of California, Berkeley, there are businesses locating on the campus. Other universities are taking this, that businesses are locating on the campus, not away from the campus, but the professors, like myself and others, are assisting in business creation and development on the campus. So we have to bring the university into where we're going. So innovative cities, Boston, San Francisco, and so forth. But at the bottom of the list, unfortunately, we have some places in Europe. The top of the list are mostly places that you know of very well that are very innovative. But the bottom of the list, some of them are good, some of them are not so good, but they are not strong. So the left-hand side of the list are places more toward the middle and the bottom. They need to be moved to the top. They need to be innovative places to incubate stronger businesses. And how do we do that? We build the businesses in the communities. We've spent a lot of money, a lot of time building the central business districts, the towers, and so on. We spend almost no time in building businesses at the neighborhood and community level. And that's where the future is. Making those neighborhoods as incubators for new businesses and financing and building new financing tools for that. So, flexi space, integrating people in the economy, understanding how youth can be part of the economy because they can go away and you lose the essential resources. Building within the university, building the structures for new jobs in the university, not away from it. Working with young people, building business plans with them for the new businesses, enterprises. And then finally, we have to make sure this is sustainably driven. Sustainability. Studying how sustainable the process will be. How do we have workshops and other things? So sustainability is not just all about the economics and the environment. It is also about the sustainability of relationships. So good places in Silicon Valley and other places have quarterly workshops, seminars, meetings where people can learn from one another. And making sure that there's the money, this $6 billion comes, is not spent, it's invested. It's invested in the creation of new opportunities through NGOs. It's invested in research and consulting. And it's invested in e-enterprises. So growth of little places like this can become important in the globe. Making sure that what was called trash in the past is now a sustainable enterprise for the future. Simple things where we can recreate the economies. A new solar system that can generate enough power for a neighborhood, developed by youth, and now being marketed globally, because this is the kind of thing you need in disaster. This is the kind of thing many communities need. So a city that is beautiful, that makes strong neighborhoods, that takes space like this and takes it into incubators, has great future-proof neighborhoods, that has a beauty everywhere, will be the place of the future where jobs are created. They will not leave, youth will stay, and will have a better chance of making sure that Europe, America, Australia are the places that have a future that is really sustainable environmentally, socially, and economically. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. You summarized very well the complexity of being an economic leader today, from reducing social inequality, which can have an impact in terms of on business, and to boost local innovative systems, and even turning places into beautiful places, which may be some difficult in some places, though. We would have time for a couple of questions for Ed. And then we will have opportunities to open the floor for discussion after we have heard from Deborah and Baron, but I would like to ask if there is a couple of questions. Robert, please.
Sorry
Is there a microphone? Yes, there is.
Professor Blakely, very interesting presentation. I was intrigued by the slide you showed about innovative and less innovative cities. And bottom of the list of all was Gdansk in Poland. I happened to be there on an OECD project, and it struck me as actually being a pretty innovative place. But how did you measure innovation for that slide?
This list came from The Economist. So many of you have probably seen it.
A suspicious magazine at the best of times.
British publication. But to tell you the truth, I'd like to be in Gdansk to show they're wrong, versus being in Silicon Valley where I have to prove nothing.
Any other question for Ed? Otherwise, we will continue the debate after we have heard from Deborah Munford, who works at the OECD. And as I said, she's an expert on economic leadership, and we heard a lot about the expectations we have with economic leaders. Deborah has also had the opportunity to look at the Irish situation, and where we are trying to realign local development with local government, which is not an easy task in this country. So she will have got additional insights from this situation. Deborah, please.
Thank you, Sylvain. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's quite a privilege to follow on from Ed, so I guess all I can do as a younger person is do my best here. But over the last year, the OECD LEAD programme has had the privilege to work with Ireland as it is embarking on what is a very challenging and ambitious agenda of reform and realigning a local economic development system that exists. For the last 30 years, the LEAD know-how and the toolkit that we've developed has very much been on the premise that delivering smarter local economic development matters. It is fundamental to reducing inequality, to creating jobs, and to creating dynamic growth-led economies. We know that this is also a belief that has been shared here in Ireland, and certainly the approach that has been taken here would be consistent with our own, that the local matters, and that as we emerge into a recovery from this rather challenging global economic crisis, the local will matter more than ever. It has become more critical, not less. But we also know that local economic development doesn't happen by accident. Our own existence within the organisation over 30 years informs us that certain fundamentals are necessary, and to develop a rigorous knowledge base and analytical base from which we work from, which allows us to understand that local development works over cycles. This isn't just political cycles, this is business cycles, this is economic cycles. And as practitioners and policymakers, the more knowledge and understanding we have of this cyclical approach, the better we will become equipped to dealing with the responses that are required for today's world. And certainly what our work has reminded us, and certainly the reforms in Ireland also reinforce this, is that there are certain skills that are fundamental to this process and powers that need to be accorded. But our belief within the LEAD programme is that the three fundamental pillars for good local economic development are the strategy, the system in which it is operating, and as Sylvain alluded to earlier, increasingly economic leadership. We also have learnt from our work that began in 2009 with recession recovery and reinvestment, putting in place jobs that last, and more recently new growth and investment strategies, that the crisis hasn't changed some of the long-term drivers that we've all been working to. Those of us involved in local economic development, we still have to address what has been going before us for several decades. But there are new demands that this crisis has put upon us. The way that it has stalled certain projects, the way that the austerity approaches that have been pursued in some countries have reduced investment availability and required new ways of working at the local level. Often local areas are faced with the dual challenge now of creating jobs and investment, whilst at the same time retaining jobs and investment. These are mammoth tasks that local leaders now have to engage in. If we think about what will be needed, some of us know that these are, in a sense, the fundamentals as to what makes us consider local economic development. But this isn't just about pursuing a rhetoric, because the interventions that will be needed now, and in a sense the opportunities to recalibrate aspects of local development, are going to become more important than ever. This morning when Minister Bruton spoke, he touched upon the diverse range of reforms and really of a scale that many of us can't comprehend that are taking place throughout the Irish government at the moment. But one of the things that he made clear was the interdependency of these reforms and the need for a collaborative approach that is emerging. Now, this isn't just collaborative within the tiers, the top level of government, the national level. As Ireland is embarking upon a very ambitious agenda to, in a sense, restore local democracy by empowering local government and local actors, this is going to require a much more refined process of vertical collaboration, but also to bring in the other stakeholders that work at the local level, the local development companies, the private sector, trade unions, community groups, who are all going to have to take an enhanced role in how local economic development is delivered. The comments that I've been asked to make really are quite a link between what Ed has said and the rest of the presentations which will follow. Because our work that we're doing here in Ireland is very much as the new system is emerging, we're bringing our experience and know-how to help them design how the implementation will take place. What are some of the delivery tools that are going to be needed? But if we think back to what Minister Bruton said, Ireland has two fundamental responses which are critical for local development. The very ambitious large-scale agenda of putting people first, a reform of local government, an alignment process which is about creating a new system for local economic development in Ireland, but also action for jobs. From our perspective, these two agendas are parallel agendas, and they should be seen as something that will run together, because the local level is fundamental in delivering on action for jobs. The local level is where the 150,000 jobs will be created. Jobs are place-based. And therefore, as the reforms around putting people first and the local government reforms, alignment, creating a new system for local economic development emerge, those involved in that process are going to be required to take a much more proactive role under very challenging circumstances, the likes of which many practitioners in this room probably don't get to work in too often. But it is about reclaiming an agenda, recalibrating the system to deliver the jobs and the growth that Ireland is going to need in recovery, but in a particularly inclusive way. Now, I'm going to pass over now to my colleague Baron Frankel, because when we did our first peer review meetings with Ireland, we decided that we would very much have a practitioner approach to the peer reviewers that were involved in it. So we had Baron Frankel, Gerard McLeave, who is also with us today, a Deputy State Secretary from Latvia, and in long-term advice for the LEAD programme, Greg Clark. All individuals who have been engaged in designing processes of reform and implementing processes of reform. And the work that Baron is leading in Manchester now is a particularly interesting and relevant example to Ireland. Because, again, like many of you in this room, Baron is working within a context of austerity, of reduced public services, but also about creating a new opportunity for Manchester. So I will now pass you over to Baron. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Deborah, and thank you, Sylvain. And good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. So I'm an economic development practitioner, but as Deborah says, not in theory. I very much practice my trade in Greater Manchester. I'm a lawyer by trade, latterly at the European Central Bank, so I have a good macro understanding of Ireland, and through the work that we've done recently, have also got a good microeconomic understanding too. You can see a bit of the blurb of Manchester there, but it is instructive very much to have case studies in this respect, and the parallels, as Deborah suggested, are strong. And when you look at half a dozen examples and try then to utilise the lessons that have been learnt from those in a situation like Ireland's, I think it is very useful. And I think, I certainly gain as much of it as I think we give to the work in Ireland. Just to give you a sense, so you get the perspective. Greater Manchester is a growing place, population just south of 3 million, so it's not quite the size of Ireland, but it's in the same league. Wales, Croatia, it's about the same size. There has been a great population growth over the last 10, 12, 15 years, which we all take as a sign of success. And, ballpark, the city's really established itself as the largest and, let's say, most economically thrusting conurbation in the UK outside London. And how has that happened? In essence, it's through the economic dynamics. It's about mobilising all of the public interventions that are available, not just in a narrow sort of economic development sense, but across the patch, with health, with transport, with police, with housing, pushing them forward in a coherent and a consistent way towards economic growth, to which there is a cost, but it's about having a properly integrated governance structure and a very, very clear strategy and a transparent strategy about what that's trying to achieve. And the other thing is it's done it by being rather distinctive. We're not without our battles with central government. Ireland is a very, very centralised state, I have discovered, but so is the UK. And again, in a similar way, the tensions between the local and the central are quite difficult to work with. Central government doesn't like the idea of a patchwork quilt. Everything has to fit together neatly and nicely. But that's not how it works on the ground. That's not where jobs come from. It is about areas, localities, in sensible economic geographies, understanding their comparative advantages and forcing things through with those, with or sometimes again with central government even. There's the challenges that we face. Insert the name of your city here and it will be very similar, but nonetheless very real. I think one of the things that we were able to apply, one of sort of Manchester's signatures, is the governance. Good governance is not it is a necessary but not sufficient element for any of this. If you can't decide on the geography and you can't decide on the system of collaboration, you will not get very far. And I stress again that certainly for Greater Manchester, it's the economy stupid. So whatever governance you have, it's about directing that governance, investing that governance in wanting to see economic growth. But, I won't go into the sort of the technicalities of it, but there are many, many years of collaboration between 10 different local authorities that make up Greater Manchester. We recently, about 2 or 3 years ago, forced the last administration to put through primary law that enabled us to set up a statutory body and then work with the current administration, which is, is a very different colour to actually enact the secondary legislation that enabled us to do that. So we have a statutory underpinning for the way we work, which is very important. And then there's all sorts of innovations like the local enterprise partnerships you'll be aware of, which are sort of development agencies of a kind. And recently there's a new democratic layer that's gone in, police and crime commissioners. Again, I won't go into the details of them, but the point is they're all different governance structures, all around the same economic geography, all of which we all work really hard to integrate the different policy areas to go ahead in the same direction, because everybody has something to contribute, and everybody has budget, and everybody has resource, and everybody has buy-in of certain stakeholder groups. So it's very important for all of them to interact and understand what the overarching strategy is, indeed to agree to that. I think the institutional setup, and Ireland is going for a big bout of that, and that's what we've been looking at, is very, very important. It's very important to get it right, and it's very important that all the different groups who are ultimately going to have plans and have staff and have resources buy into that institutional setup and find their role in it. It's important to unglaze our eyes at this point. It's not something that gets people's hearts racing, but good decision making at the right level. There's a proven correlation between that and economic growth. So getting it right and getting people bought in is absolutely key, I would say. And then you can see, down the slide, there's all sorts of different agencies that we have that in marketing, in research, in business growth, business support, all at the same level that work towards that same strategy. The mirrors of Manchester Independent Economic Review, that was a really big part of getting that correct strategy into place. The key word in there is independent. We got lots of people who have very little to do with Manchester, people like Jim O'Neill, who's chief economist at Goldman Sachs, people like Dan Coyle, who's the vice chair of the BBC Trust, and we sort of paid an awful lot of money to go away and really get the best academics, business people in the world, not from Manchester, not beholden to Manchester, and to go away and write what they thought, our 5-year plan should be, our 10-year plan should be. And there are a lot of difficult messages for the governance in Manchester. A lot of things that the local authorities absolutely didn't want to do. But there were some very tough messages, and over, a good couple of years of working that through, that did form a really solid basis of the strategy that still today, we're working through. It's an ongoing evidence base. We call it today the Integrated Greater Manchester Evidence Base, and I'll flash aside in a minute what it is. But it incorporates health, economy, crime, transport. Even though many of those areas don't rightly belong to Greater Manchester, we have to pull them down from government, and that's not an easy thing. Again, I won't go into the particular policies, but for us it's biotech, it's healthcare, it's science. Manchester succeeded by riding the wave of property and finance and retail that existed a few years ago. For a decade or two, what we know about the next wave is it will not be property, and it will not be finance, and it will certainly not be retail. Obviously, all different places are trying to find what it will be. A lot of our horses are on science. If you don't know about the miracles of graphene, you soon will, but in a couple of years, not a couple of decades, I will be able to unfold in front of your screen, which is every bit as big as that, which I can keep in my pocket, which is made of graphene. It's the thinnest, strongest, most malleable and conductible material known to man. And the races are the races on to commercialise it, is to get the products out there, and we're very dedicated to making sure those happen in Manchester where the stuff was invented. There's a graphic of what the integrated evidence base looks like, something like our key sectors. China is a very important thing for us, I'll come back to. I don't need to flash this really in front of you, I know I've only got 7 minutes. We're funding a big graphene institute to the tune of about 60 million quid. And one of the big decisions that Manchester made, that again I think stands us in fantastic stead and is relevant for yourselves as well. Government, localities, regions, and it is exactly the same in Ireland, have all different funding streams, pots of money that come out, European money, ERDF, which you're also very familiar with. We tried very, very hard in Manchester not to be chasing those pots of money and trying to find things that work for them, but to take all those pots of money and make them work for us. So we have a single investment framework, and we have developed our own pipeline, which is based on that strategy. It's a proactive understanding of spatially where do we want things to happen, where will we get the biggest economic impact, which is tough for a lot of the local authorities. Thematically, things like graphene, what do we want to happen? The sectors where we feel we have the strongest comparative advantages. And then we try to find, then we try to engineer it financially, find the right cocktails to make those projects happen and not the other way around. Then we have a single appraisal framework which measures all sorts of projects, housing, employment sites, transport, and it is the same appraisal framework, and it's objective and it is proactive. The last thing I'll say is, there's a few graphics there. If you come to the workshop, you'll see a bit more details of how it works, but the last thing I'll say is something about China. So I just caught a little bit of what you were saying, Ed, about Australia and America, so I may misinterpret it, but Europe broadly and America to a lesser degree, and Australia to a slightly different degree, are worlds of the past, the world of the future. So, as much as the last century was a century of America, the coming century, the century we're in, is a century of China, and Asia more generally. And for places like ours, we will only get ahead by being a part of that market that's being created. We all talk about Greece or even Cyprus these days, but in China creates an economy the size of Greece, the entire size of Greece, every 11.5 weeks. And we work quite a lot with our airport. In Heathrow Airport, just to give you a sense of how important the visitor element of it is, 0.7% of the passengers at Heathrow Airport who are Chinese or coming in from mainland China, by 25% of all of the luxury goods in the airport. One last example, while we're sat in the UK arguing unbelievably about 200 miles stretch of high-speed rail, China is at the back of a 3-year program building 11,000 miles of the stuff. So it is companies that understand those supply chains, that understand what's going on, that are getting into the vastly fastest growing consumer market on the planet, that's a place that's experiencing in a bad time 7, 8, 9% year-on-year growth, that will become the largest economy in the world around about 2016, 2017. Those are the places that will be able to get ahead. And that's just an example of having a single strategy that all of those agencies, all of those levels of government, all of those governance institutional elements need to understand, need to agree to, need to work towards. Clearly the public sector has a catalytic part of it, a very important part of it, and the private sector has a hugely important part of it as well. I think in terms of what we have learned to take forward, probably the single most important thing is leadership. That's the message, I guess. If I was to leave you with a message, I would. There's all sorts of investments that need to be made. There's all sorts of calls that need to be made about different levels. I've worked at many levels of government, and at every single level, the thing they all have in common is the level above is too remote, the level below is too incompetent. But the point is to understand your economic geography, to have the governance and institutional framework that can capture that can work within that, to get those stakeholders within that to a consensus, to a single strategy, a clear strategy. I think that strategy clearly has to be economic growth. I think it has to be investment-led, which is the model that we're using, which I didn't go into too much. And then you need drive and you need leadership to push it forward, and leadership at the right level, and leadership that goes out and convinces people it's the right thing to do. And that is part of the experience I hope that we are bringing to the table. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Baron, for sharing with us the experience of Manchester and transforming its future into a more entrepreneurial one. So we've heard about the components of economic development strategies, the governance, leadership. I would like to open the floor for discussion on this part of our discussions this morning on economic development. Gentlemen here on the side, please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. I'm Richard Bruton from Spain. I would just like to thank Baron Frankel and Deborah for their talk. But I was thinking while Baron was talking about something which I think is important, as we're talking about resilient communities. One man's wealth is another man's poverty. Baron said that fortunately the population of Manchester had grown over the last 10 years, but that means that unfortunately a lot of people are probably abandoning smaller, perhaps less able communities. What I would like to know is that Manchester, in its success, after its successive implementation, will also Manchester be a generous city to help other communities afterwards in its region and beyond.
Thank you very much. We'll take just a couple of questions before we answer. Yes, the gentleman at the back.
This is to Baron Frankel. As a past pupil of Manchester University on the community development side, I'm amazed that you made no mention of what I consider to be one of the greatest assets Manchester has and currently has, with the global reach in terms of strategy and marketing and a global brand, with a strong community and consumer base. You know what I'm talking about. Manchester United. And it's very strange that that wasn't mentioned. For me, it is one of the great selling points of Manchester, as a business, not as football, but as a global brand. Thank you.
Yeah, it goes back to what Ed was talking about using local assets. There's a question here.
Hello, my name is Michael McGath. I was just looking at the PowerPoint there you had, and all the things that I saw there have been outlined in every report that I've come across in the last number of months. The European Institute of Technology has, in their papers, have talked about the knowledge triangle, research and technology, businesses and higher education joined together. There's plenty of research that backs up. In Ireland, let's say, in 82% of the employment that has come from foreign direct investment in the last 10 years has been involved in areas where there's a university presence. There's also the other fact about knowledge spillover, and that companies who are located close to universities are much quicker and better able to innovate than companies that are not. Coming back to local government, I've worked in both public and private sector, so the comments I'm going to make are not based on things that I've heard from other people, but they're based on my own experience and what I've seen myself. I think that at this stage everybody knows about joining, collaboration, being innovative in order to make progress, but I have a difficulty in the mindset that could be there, and I'll give a very quick example. I'm involved in bringing a university presence to a region here in Ireland which has a population of 500,000 people. For the last 15 years, the region has been crying out for a university presence. So this is going to happen. So I just thought to myself, I will contact the local government in the 5 different counties that were involved and the city councils. And I just outlined that there is going to be a university presence here. And I was inviting them to contact me so as we could talk and see where we could develop and work together. Now, I send them to the highest areas in the local authorities, the people who are involved in strategy and development, and from that 6 or 7 emails that I sent, I got not one reply, and all I want to do is finish them. When I worked in the public sector, the culture that was entrenched in me and my outlook was that unless I'm getting paid more for doing something, I'm not going to do it. And I think maybe with all the wonderful ideas, and we all know there isn't a person here that doesn't know about what we have to do in order to create, but unless that kind of mindset is changed, then I think there's going to be a little difficulty. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So maybe we try to answer these questions. Ed, you wanted to come back to
I would like to address the last question. Is my mic on?
Yes.
I'm doing something, and I'll share with all of you. I'm running, when I get back to Australia, a Mayor's Institute. And this is bringing the mayors It started out 10 cities, it's now 7, along with their chief deputy in planning, their strategic planning manager, one other staff member, and a person who's in a significant position in local business, the Chamber of Commerce, and so on. And they will do a strategy on a problem dealing with the issues we're talking about, but the mayor must be the leader. So the mayor has to take the leadership, not reacting to presentations, and the mayors are put in teams where they criticize one another. So the outcome of this should be that the mayors will feel much stronger to lead their own staff to do the kind of thing you were talking about, to make a relationship with the university. Because as it stands now, when I've talked to all these mayors individually, they say, the staff won't let me do anything. It's yes, minister. So I'm trying to change this notion that the mayor and the elected officials are now partners to link with universities, to do the kinds of things we're talking about now. So I think we have to do a lot more work with the leadership in our communities so they see themselves as being entrepreneurs and leading entrepreneurial change.
Thank you. Now, what do you do if the leaders come from outside local governments and you need them in order to stimulate change because they have the right ideas, because they may be those who are in contact with universities, they may come from the public sector or from the community sector. And this may resonate with the situation in Ireland right now where you may have those leaders in some areas while the government is trying to stimulate, give more powers to local governments. Do you have any idea of what useful mechanisms could be in place to engage usefully with those leaders and have a healthy, non-conflicting relationship? And maybe our colleagues would like to comment on that as well.
Well, I think one of the things I've seen in many countries are leadership forums that meet usually monthly and discuss significant issues that are multi-sectoral, and they take on a task. And let me give you, I think the best example I've seen is joint venture Silicon Valley, where all the industry decided the schools were terrible. And the people who were running the schools thought they were wonderful. In the end, they formed a partnership that said one thing, that by the 3rd year, every student must be reaching his or her level in mathematics and in reading. And we will put resources, industry, in help getting to that goal. Well, over time, the schools start reforming when they have a target like that. The industry says we know how to work with youth and do internships and things from this. So I think we have to have mutual problems to solve and not just meetings. So there needs to be a task that we're trying to reach together. And I think the Manchester example sounded very much like that.
Thank you. Baron?
Yeah, I have a go and I have a quick answer to go to as well if I can. I think you're talking less about universities because, as Ed says, having a university and a triple helix, that's essential if you move, you can't have a knowledge economy really unless you have a deep and broad seat of learning. And I thought gentlemen was going to talk about University of Manchester at first. I think what you were really talking about was the incentives on the public sector and on staff within the public sector and the mindsets within them. And we are certainly in the UK, we're very old style, and in Ireland, I think I would say even more so in spades. It's a very safety first, it's a very safe culture, it's a very safeguarded culture, and actually how you move the public sector much further out on the risk curve, much more entrepreneurial, and you have to make it risk and rewards. You need to talk about bonuses, you need to talk about performance related pay, you need to talk about people moving on, you need to talk about different units having the investment in themselves in the future on a certain timeline that takes them off that trajectory if they're not delivering set results. In some areas, the Mayor's Office in London, the body that I work for, which is a private company, though we are Greater Manchester, I think you do see experiments in that way. Some of the cities in the US, and particularly Chicago, very good at that. So moving public sector, elements of the public sector much more down the risk curve in terms of understanding what would drive a local economy. And the other element of that is systematic. And actually just in the taxi over here, unprompted, the taxi driver, without even knowing who I was or what I was doing, started talking about the property tax. Not in a positive way, but I didn't duck the challenge, and the message I gave to him was that, local government has to be rewarded for getting things right. If actually you don't get anything, whether you have a fantastic economy or not, the incentives are very much less. If local government would actually benefit and have a lot more money to spend on different things, were it to succeed in that respect, the incentives are right. And I'll give you just one more Manchester example. So alone in the UK, we have achieved something called the earn back model. Ballpark, for around about £100 additional GVA or GDP is created in a place. Generally, local government in the UK takes about 2p through the business rates. The exchequer, the national exchequer, the treasury, takes about 28p. And we have got a deal that, as well as the 2p that we have, we get an additional 2p, which is extracted without causal relationship from the treasury. And it's only for additional GVA, for our own investment. So all the incentives are put on us to go, above and beyond, to find more money to invest it, to create more GVA, because we will benefit more. And it's systems like that, and they come in 100 shapes and sizes, that will incentivise people more. But I do think that the personal element is hugely important as well. Putting staff, developing staff, training staff, changing, staff to. I can just do 2 quick sentences on the other two. So Manchester United, so I was trying not to come and sell Manchester, but don't worry. I think we recognise that Manchester United is, by some way, not one of, but the single greatest asset we have. No doubt. There's a massive survey that's done in China every single year about brands, and I'm not talking about football or sport or the UK. The second most recognised brand in the whole of China is Manchester United after Coca-Cola. So it's an enormous asset. The front page of The Economist was about Africa the other day. There was a lady in a market. What T-shirt was she wearing? A Manchester United shirt. So it's an amazing asset. And just a very serious question on the first one. So, and I see I've rambled a little bit, so I'll be brief. But I think we are hugely aware of the areas around us and the consequences that growth in one part of a conurbation or an area or the world has on another. Greater Manchester is also full of areas of poverty, massive poverty, and as well as being one of the most successful places in the world. The story we tell us often is that the deep poverty, around about 20% of the entire population is in the worst 5% of the whole UK. So there are deep areas of deprivation as well, and many, many systems in place to internalise that and understand that. But this is a very mobile world, and we make no apologies for trying to attract talent. You look at New York, you look at London, they are attracting the best people to the most productive places. So it is not a zero-sum game. It's about creating additionality, GVA, other areas by bringing the right people to the right places and the right industries and the right sectors. And, that is the game that everybody is in, like it or not, I would say.
Thank you. Deborah, the final word.
Thank you, Sylvain. Really just a point to pick up on and follow on from what Ed was saying. Over the last year, we've worked with Barron and 11 other localities and local leaders to work around new growth and investment strategies. But our work over the last, perhaps decade, has really focused in on the need for more attention and a much more collaborative approach to economic leadership, how this unfolds, what it happens. We are currently finalising what will be hopefully the first of a programme of work which will continue to look in much more detail about what are the components of local economic leadership, what really makes it happen. And there are some fundamentals that hit us, and trust is perhaps one of the, if not the most important issue. When we look at places like Manchester or Barcelona or Glasgow or Turin, we know that there is a trust relationship that emerges between political generations, political leaders. In Turin at the moment, you have former mayors working with the current mayor to address a crisis situation. You have Glasgow, which has evolved its approach to local economic development over 3 decades to get to a point where it dares to have an economic forum for the city that is all private sector people. Now, that would not have happened 30 years ago. It probably wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. But it's about creating a new ambition and a new conversation. We saw in Barron's slide the Manchester family. Well, the family is a broad church in a sense, and what they bring in are the public sector, the private sector, universities and others, and getting people on board in different ways. But this stuff is very difficult, and it's long term, and it doesn't happen overnight. And so concerted efforts are going to be required from an Irish perspective as you are introducing a new system. It is also going to be about creating a new leadership cadre which can build on what exists at present, but also is going to create something very robust for the future.
Could I just add one thing to that? And this is not as empirical as I'd like, but I noticed one of the things when I was looking at the places that were growing and innovative and most creative, they had a high density of NGOs. That they had a high density of nonprofit organizations that were doing all kinds of things. Some of them were doing environmental things. Some of them were doing church and faith-based things. But that high density of NGOs gave them a flexibility that places that only relied on government or only the private sector were unable to do. So I think one of the roles of government now should be to create its own internal critics, the NGOs, because they become your partners.
And the Irish experience has a lot to tell in that regard. We will change our panel, and this is an opportunity for you to stretch up, get a coffee, do whatever you like to do, but this is not a real break. This is just literally an opportunity to do what you need to do. Let's be back in 5 minutes, and I would like to congratulate our panel for a very stimulating discussion.
nature of human beings, so just...
Yeah. So I will, so North America participate in the project that you're talking about. So I mentioned that. Obviously, you will talk about it. I'm sure the result will be presented again at November.
Yes. Okay, great. You need a bell to ring.
Yeah. They come here also. Yes.
So, yeah, I was crossing out the exit door. I'm forced back.
I was about to ask for 15. So,
okay. Present, lunch. It's an hour, isn't it?
I know it's tight. So please, if you can sit as we would like to reconvene the session.
Yes.
California?
Yeah.
That's right. 2 slides. And then it's Johnson. Please, could you sit down? We will start. Hello, hello. It's very difficult. So you have reminded me very well one of the purposes of the Forum on Partnerships and Local Governance, which is to provide an opportunity for networking. And you have done that very well. So already one of the objectives of this meeting is being achieved. We have not yet achieved, however, the objective of this session. We will now cover the labor market policy component. Please, could you sit down? Some noise. All right, so there's no area of policy where the challenge of finding a solution between how to accommodate the trade-off between effective national delivery and local innovation that is more acute than labor market policy. Labor market policy and training because of skills that is important in a knowledge-based economy. So labor market policy and training are important to be managed nationally because we want to stimulate mobility, especially we want to tackle the skill shortages, especially when we have a high rate of unemployment. But at the same time, as we have heard this morning, human resources skills are key locally. There's no effective local strategy that will achieve its goal without a strong human resource component, and this requires some degree of autonomy. So we will talk about this issue here, and we will use in part Ireland as a laboratory. Ireland of our place. Ireland is one of the countries that has participated in a project of the OECD called Local Job Creation, which aims at looking at how labor market policy and training can contribute to job creation and quality job creation. So Ireland is one of those countries. You have the list there. I will not go through them. And the goal is really not to do an evaluation of how labor market policy is effective. It's not about how efficient it is in returning people to employment or how it can meet business needs quickly. It is more about how labor market policy and training can contribute to a more inclusive and robust growth. We're looking at how they can help to anticipate new economic development opportunities and align itself with economic development and long-term economic strategies that are designed locally. It's about how labor market policy and training can help also to promote mobility and progression in employment, especially for the low-skilled people. So it's not about creating, cheap labor, or it's in firms that can improve their productivity and in turn create good quality jobs. And actually, it's about not only delivering or producing the skills that are important, but also making sure that the firms will use them in order to themselves increase their productivity, contribute to the resilience of the local economy, and again, in turn, create better quality jobs. So to talk about the results for Ireland, and for the first time, I think, we will have John Sweeney from the National Economic and Social Council in Ireland, who has been working with us who has been preparing a report based on the work that has been done as part of this project. And this will be followed by Randall Eberts, president of the W.E. of John Institute for Employment Research in the United States, based in Michigan. And Randall has been doing the same work for the United States as part of this project, and he has been involved in the work in Australia. So he will be able to react to some of the findings and share his own impressions based on the work in the United States and Australia. And Northern Ireland is also being reviewed as part of this project. We are very pleased to have Minister Stephen Ferry, Minister for Employment and Learning from Northern Ireland. The results for Northern Ireland are not yet ready. They will be presented this autumn at the lead directing committee that will be hosted in Derry, London, Derry. So thank you very much, Mr. Ferry, for hosting us for this very important meeting this autumn. And for today, you will be able to share with us Northern Ireland experience on how to work with employers and bringing youth into the workforce. So to start with, we'll ask John to share with us the emerging results from the study on local job creation in Ireland.
Thank you, Sylvain, and good morning. This is me dressed up, or so my wife showed me this morning. But I feel I should have dressed down because, as Sylvain said, I'm coming from the laboratory. In fact, I feel I'm coming from a workshop where I have been using a box of tools and a large engine for some months. The box of tools will interest all of you, no matter what country you're from. It's the methodology that the lead employ for trying to focus in on how and why employment services and vocational education and training really back local job creation or don't. And some of you would be much more interested in the particular engine I was given to work on, which is the Irish Public Employment Service, and Ireland's Vocational Education and Training System, where we have provisional findings. So I feel if I hold all of you for some of the time, and some of you for all of the time, I won't be doing too badly. First, just a word as to why this engine may be of, well, what this engine is now facing. Ireland's Public Employment Service and Vocational Education System is on a long journey in difficult conditions. It's fully deserving of a good overhaul and expert servicing. This chart just captures Ireland's fall from grace. It's the employment rate, a very powerful indicator of a good performing labour market and of wide access to employment. And it shows how over 10 years we climbed from under 60 to reach the marvellous figure of 70% of all people aged between 15 and 64 having some type of employment. But what it took us 10 years to achieve, we lost in 3 to 4. The fall from grace has been stunning. Briefly, we began to plan for all that a high employment rate made possible. The higher social welfare spending. We maintained active labour market programmes at high levels. We embarked on strategies for childcare, for disability. For a brief period, with the revenue that high employment rates made possible, we were beginning to work on many necessary fronts. And now, with the fall in employment that you see has come, it has contributed to a collapse in tax revenue, and we've just entered totally different territory altogether. Youth, well, most of the jobs lost that fall, over one half of the jobs were lost in the construction sector, as our Minister, Richard Bruton, has already indicated. Most of those lost by men. But youth have also been hugely hit. Their employment rate fell from 50 to under 30% over 5 years. And of course, low-skilled and migrants who came to this country in large numbers after the enlargement of the European Union have been affected disproportionately also. It's occasioned 3 huge wrenches to the labour market. We speak mostly of the third, but the first big wrench has been emigration. We are now losing to the economy and to our local communities a significant number of educated young people, some of whom are even leaving jobs because they now feel that the jobs they're in have very few and poor prospects ahead. We've also seen a huge withdrawal from the workforce. Ireland's participation rate has fallen from 65 to 60%, the largest drop recorded in the OECD. As many people return to education, not a bad thing, retire early, not such a good thing, or develop just different lifestyle strategies of which we know very little. And finally, of course, we've seen unemployment soar. In the 8 years up to the start of the Great Recession, we were keeping the unemployment rate below 5%. Now it's persistently between 14 and 15%, with over 60% of it long term. There have been many major responses on the part of the labour market authorities to our current crisis. We realise now, with the benefit of hindsight, several of the things that we did and did not do during the good years to develop a public employment service and a vocational education training system that was apt for the 21st century. Looking back, we realise our public employment service became something of a residual service. We simply did not need to invest in it during the good years. Most people found jobs and most employers recruited without using it. Our training sector during the good years concentrated to a huge extent on turning out people needed in construction and allied trades. The buoyancy of tax revenue allowed us to significantly improve our social welfare payments without complementing them with activation strategies. And it's still a source of pride to us, or should be, that the at risk of poverty associated with being unemployed in Ireland is one of the lowest in the European Union. We also maintained active labour market policies at levels without complementing their scale with good evaluation. So when the crisis struck, and the fiscal crisis in particular, demands on service providers soared at the same time as resources began to be pared back. There have been many good innovations in programme design and service delivery with a view to doing more with less, and in particular with a view to targeting provision more on the unemployed and on the most disadvantaged among them. The response to the crisis, however, has gone well beyond altering existing programmes and introducing new ones to include fundamentally reshaping the architecture which develops new programmes and which seeks to implement them. The reforms are furthest advanced in the public employment service. Since January of last year, 3 services, job matching and job placement, the administration of benefit, and the design and supervision of active labour market programmes are being rolled into one. And the new integrated service intro is designed so as to be able to adopt a strong activation approach that will minimise the risk that high long-term unemployment mutates into structural unemployment. A second reform is underway to the vocational education and training system. The country's 33 vocational educational committees and the FOSS network of 16 training centres are being brought together under 16 regional education and training boards that themselves will be under the direction of a new further education and training authority called SOLAS. And finally, the third set of reforms are to regional and local government. The country's 8 regional authorities and 2 regional assemblies at the NUTS 2 level are being replaced by 3 new regional assemblies. And local government is being asked to acquire a stronger role in promoting economic development and is considered to have an essential role to play in our economic recovery. I'd like to... and I think Deborah drew our attention to the significance of the reform of this particular area of reform for how we get out of where we are. In Ireland, the word local, another reason I didn't dress down is that I've come from the north side. I live in a part of Dublin where there is a university, but for most of my neighbours, the university is a rather remote place where the most interesting young people come from countries in the world that they couldn't find on the map. In Ireland, the local is intensely local. Many of you will work here from Ireland, will work for communities that may range between 200 people and 20,000. If you come from city and county authorities, the average population base is 135,000. If you come from Ireland's regional assemblies, the average population base is 575,000. And even now, with the proposed 3 new mega assemblies, we will have 3 assemblies for the whole country, regional assemblies. The smallest will serve a population of 800,000, and the largest will serve a population of 2.2 million. So when Baron Frankel this morning described how local in the United Kingdom, on the other island as I call it, has a travel to work area with 7 million people, well, if that's local, this country is sure small. So, what's the box of tools I've been given to work with? The OECD LEAD programme inquires, as I say, into how employment services and vocational training best support local economic development, and has refined 4 criteria or themes. Experience has taught us that focusing on these themes reveals most quickly the effectiveness or lack of it with which a country is using its employment services and training provision. The first theme, in the top right-hand corner, aligning policies and programmes with local economic development. It really has to do with how well employment services and training providers read and respond to the specific needs of local employers. What degree of encouragement, autonomy are they given? Have they the resources and capabilities to do it? The first theme really has to do with the governance of the public employment service and of the vocational and educational training system. The second theme, bottom right-hand corner, has to do with the degree of emphasis placed on workers' skills in the business models of the private sector and the strategies of the public and not-for-profit sectors. How do people access training? Is their full potential appreciated and utilised by their employer? Are they helped to think in terms of a career and to pursue it? And so on. The third theme has to do with targeting policy on at-risk groups. The extent to which the development of resilient local economy is focused and uniting the different actors. This does not happen if, for example, women feel forced to choose between caring at home and... I've slipped into the fourth theme of inclusion. Let me finish that. An inclusive labour market. We can't have an inclusive labour market if we don't pay huge attention to what enables women to hold jobs in large numbers, with the integration of migrants, with the integration of young people seeking their first employment, and so on. And the third theme that I inadvertently skipped over has to do with the extent to which the objective of developing a resilient local economy is focused and uniting the different stakeholders. Are the local economic sectors with the best employment prospects clearly identified? Is entrepreneurship being effectively fostered? Is the local area's niche in the wider national and global context being exploited to the full? Now, around those four themes, the LEAD methodology has formulated 100 questions, many with subsets, so it's in fact quite a few more than 100 questions, to create, and the way in which the questions are answered allow it to create this dashboard that you're now looking at. On the dashboard you'll see that each major theme has four, in fact, sub-criteria, and each has been given a score. If the colour is filled out to the outside circle, it's been scored with a 5. If it's not filled in at all, it's got a score of 0. So it's a visual and quite a powerful visual playback of how a country's employment services and vocational education training system appear to be performing. A score of 1 means performance of the theme is poor. A 5 means it constitutes international best practice and is as good as the OECD has found anywhere else. And as you can see, Ireland gets no 1s, but no 5s. On the 16 sub-criteria scored, we do, however, get 5 4s, meaning performance in those specific areas is considered above the international average. On the other hand, we score a low 2, signifying below average on one sub-criterion, and remain below 3 on the remaining sub-criteria. So, in the time left, I want to just briefly unfold the story, which may now be of most interest to the Irish here present. Here are the 4 sub-criteria that try to unpack the first theme, and insofar as one can, in one sentence, resume the core finding to date. The first sub-criteria inquires about the flexibility with which public employment services and vocational education training is provided. What autonomy is there at the local level? Not just to implement national measures, but to produce measures that read and respond to the local circumstances. Well, there's more of it in vocational education and training in Ireland than within the public employment service. Individual intro offices, as they now are, forced employment services, as they used to be, often collaborate closely with other local actors, but usually on how to ensure the maximum impact or drawdown of national measures. In fact, they are not free to design and introduce locally specific measures. Where there's a local employment service to collaborate with, even the service level agreement is drawn up at the national level. By contrast, the main vocational education and training providers, and here I'm speaking about FOSS training centres and VECs, do seek to align their respective provision with local needs, but in quite different ways. Both seek to incorporate a significant element of bottom-up in their planning, In the case of FOSS training, course selection, course content and course standards are significantly informed and shaped by its regional divisions and by its head office. The flexibility of FOSS training hinges particularly, though, on the strength of these regional divisions and on the extent of its recourse to external providers. On the other hand, in the case of the 33, soon to become 16, VECs, the Department of Education and Skills monitors the aggregate budgets tightly, the course quality lightly, but leaves the actual composition of course provision largely to the individual VEC. And within the VEC, the flexibility hinges to a large extent on the crucial role of the adult education officer. The ambitious transformations of the public employment service and the vocational education system in Ireland are, we found, widely acknowledged as necessary, but there are significant concerns with the pace and simultaneity of so much reform at a time when labour market conditions are poor. There's wide acknowledgement that time, commitment and leadership will be needed to steer the reforms to a successful conclusion and to merge organisations that have been accustomed to different procedures and which have developed quite different cultures. I'm going to allow you to come back to me in workshops or in order to move a little more quickly through these. If I come to the second theme, I will pick here. You see again the 4 sub-criteria and the one-liners that try to convey the principal tenor of the findings that we're coming up with. Let me just emphasise here that in Ireland is clear the skill needs of internationally trading sectors have a high profile. And with a set of strong state development agencies that cooperate with each other and with local stakeholders, principally higher education institutions but also local authorities, to help ensure that the high skills needed by exporting enterprises are met. But more could be done to support employers in domestic sectors. They are major employers. 57% of all private sector workers in Ireland work in SMEs that are not exporting. And a number of them are in domestic sectors that have a high growth trajectory, including healthcare, education and energy. Yet domestic services suffer from a poor economic image and are often regarded as a poor relation in comparison to the high-tech sectors, manufacturing exports and high value-added services. Yet the job quality, jumping to the last point, of inward investment in Ireland is high, and the quality of life to be enjoyed at the regional and local level, echoing Ed Blakely's point, is widely acknowledged as a major asset, but primarily in attracting and retaining high-skilled workers, and thus the companies that employ them. Where inward investment occurs, the synergies between large exporting companies and the quality and dynamics of local sectors are generally widely appreciated. Though, as many of you will point out, inward investment in Ireland has proved consistently difficult to distribute geographically, and there is no sign of that becoming easier. And ultimately, the effectiveness with which policy is directed to local employment sectors. Again, I've managed to jump from theme 3. I rejected theme 2. Let me just say one word here. No, let me conclude with, and best I can to my time, with the very important point of an inclusive labour market. There is a strong emphasis in Ireland on raising the employability of the disadvantaged. The vibrancy of our local development sector and its level of engagement in drawing down and implementing national and EU policies is up there with the best practice in the OECD. For example, nationally designed direct employment programmes hinge largely on local groups acting as sponsors and creating activities that are accepted as eligible. You may not know, but 28% of all FOSS-funded training is channeled through the not-for-profit sector. The growth in scale and diversity of the local development sector, however, has itself created problems. And these are it is hoped that these are being addressed through the alignment of the local government and local development sectors about which Deborah spoke. The cost of childcare and the elderly remains high, and that needs to say nothing. There is major concern at youth unemployment in Ireland, but it's not translated yet into a national policy or local strategies that specifically address it. There are good individual programmes and bodies. Think of Feroga, think of Youth Reach, but they remain somewhat isolated and in a sense are being denied the synergies that could arise from stronger coordination mechanisms and a clearer overall youth strategy. Employers frequently express concern at youth unemployment, yet they find that young people lack the requisite work experience and employability skills for immediate recruitment. It makes it all the more regrettable then that progress has been slow in expanding apprenticeship and traineeship type provision for young people. And finally, to end on a good note, where Ireland's score is significantly above average, immigration on a large scale occurred quickly and was resolved remarkably over a short period of time in Ireland. It helped, of course, that much of this inflow was of well-educated EU citizens from the 2004 accession states. And yet the language and cultural difficulties that they faced should not be underestimated. It is clear that there has been significant responsiveness on the part of public authorities to this inflow, and as importantly on the part of civil society and its many actors, including NGOs. Low-skilled migrants from outside the European Union and however, continue to encounter the most difficulties. With that, I'll leave it. The methodology can be accessed on the OECD website, and the final report, of course, will be available perhaps at the end of April. But in the meantime, any feedback would be immensely appreciated and even perhaps contribute to making the final report better than it might otherwise be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. No doubt there's a lot of reactions that people would like to make. But I think to be on the safe side of things, I would like to ask Randall to share some of his views based on the other countries, and then we can open the floor after Minister Ferry. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sylvain. Certainly is a pleasure to be asked to be a discussant for this section of this morning's presentations. John Sweeney has put together a very detailed and very comprehensive view of the Irish economic development and workforce development programs here, and so I won't try to look at this in any particular detail. But what I would like to do, and I've been asked to do this, is to put the Ireland experience into a broader context, particularly with respect to the job creation project that OECD LEAD is conducting at this point. So the two countries, obviously, that I'll be looking at to offer that broader perspective are the U.S. and Australia. As Sylvain said, I've been involved in both of those with this job creation project. And, of course, I can't get into too much detail with that either because we don't have much time before lunch, but I do hope that what I say does whet your appetite for more detailed conversations at the workshops this afternoon and tomorrow. So before I launch into looking at the U.S. and Australia models, I would like to give a context to this, a reason why we're very much interested in the integration of economic development and workforce development. And what I'd like to do to offer that context, if I can advance this slide, let's see, there we go, here we are, is to talk about the skill shortage and mismatch that seems to be very prevalent around the world, actually. Every place I seem to go, in the U.S. as well as other countries, they talk about skill mismatch. Employers complain that they just can't find qualified workers for the jobs that they need to fill, which seems to be quite odd given the high unemployment rate and the low employment rates that we observe in so many countries. But of course, without qualified workers, employers can't fill the job openings, and if they can't do that, then they certainly can't create jobs. So increasing skills and improving the match between supply of and the demand for skills is a critical challenge that so many countries face, so many regions face. And so it's about bringing together then the demand side and the supply side so that we can see how we can address this critical challenge. Let me put this into context in the U.S. to really give you perhaps some real concrete evidence that this isn't just talk. This is actually real as we look at what's happening in our metropolitan areas. Each one of these dots represents a metropolitan area, and we have 100 dots here, which represent the 100 largest metropolitan areas in the United States. And we have the education gap, which we'll interpret as a skills gap on the horizontal axis, and we have new openings as a share of existing jobs on the vertical axis. And you'll see that there's a negative relationship here, that those metropolitan areas that have a larger skill gap have a lower job creation rate than those that have a lower skill gap. And we also see it with respect to the unemployment rate. Those metropolitan areas that have a higher education or skills gap have a higher unemployment rate. So this idea of skills gap and job creation, unemployment rate, seems to be real when we look at how this fits together in the United States. So as I mentioned, the OECD LEAD has a current project under job creation, but they've been looking at this for a long time, this notion of how do we bring together the skills utilization, so that we can reduce the skills gap. Now, their studies have come up with three basic components of integration, that is, integration between workforce and economic development. Of course, the first one is about flexibility. How can we respond to the local needs? National governments, regional governments can make policy, but it's really at the local level where the needs are really expressed in terms of a skill mismatch and other issues that become critical factors. The second one is partnerships. How do we leverage and rationalize the resources that we have at the local level? And these resources can come from the national government, but they can also come from, organizations. We talked about NGOs this morning. Organizations that are there in that local area that can help bring these resources together to bear on the needs of the customers of the workforce and economic development activities. And then finally, collaboration. Now, you might think that's just partnerships, but collaboration, in my mind, really means how do we bring together and sustain meaningful partnerships? Okay, it's not just saying that, we partner with one another, but how can we make this something that really works for the local area in addressing these needs? And this requires a number of things that have already been discussed today, but I think it's very worthwhile putting them in a list here. The first one is a common vision. And this has to be a common vision not just within a sector or within an organization. It's a common vision across organizations and across sectors. And to have this common vision, we have to act upon it with respect to strategic planning. And we've talked about that in Manchester and other places as well. And then, of course, there's leadership. And that is so fundamental, that we have to have the leadership in order to really activate this vision and put this strategic plan into practice, as well as just mobilizing the local area to say that these are the things that we need to really work on. Ed Blakely was talking about, really having a challenge, not just a, sort of abstract vision, but a challenge, a task that everyone can agree on that has to be worked on together. And metrics are vital because unless you have the metrics to tell you where you've been and where you're going, you never know if you're actually moving in the right direction. And metrics are also important for being the glue that holds together these organizations. You have to have a meaningful conversation, a concrete conversation among the organizations that are coming together to act upon that common vision. And metrics are vital for that type of a meaningful conversation. Resource alignment, we'll be talking about that throughout the day. And trust, and this is something Deborah brought up. It's something that others have mentioned as well. For a U.S. example, we looked at 4 sites, and one of the sites was Sacramento, California. And what we found there was a trust that was so pervasive that it meant that these organizations that were coming together in a very meaningful way did not need formal relationships to make this work. They did not need a MOU or whatever. They had the trust among themselves. And this trust was something that was perpetuated among the leaders. As one might retire, the other one took over. And we asked, how do you perpetuate this? And they said, well, it's expected of us to be part of this partnership, and trust was part of that. It was quite profound and something that I think I'll never forget. And finally, collaborative infrastructure. Partnerships do not form without a cost. You need to have the donuts and the coffee, and you need to have the administrative infrastructure so that you can meet, and you can meet effectively, and you can keep this dialogue moving. And so trying to put this together without some type of infrastructure that is financed in some way leads to probably results that aren't as meaningful as they could be. So let me talk about these two models, U.S. and I have about 2 or 3 minutes to do this, and so I want to just focus on the similarities and the differences. And what I'm focusing in here is on the local partnerships, okay? And the similarities between the U.S. and Australia are these. Both countries contract out their job search assistants, and in the U.S. training to private providers. So we have this private sector model. We have local providers for all these services. We have performance outcomes. That is, they're actually outcomes. Do the individuals in these programs get a job? Do they keep a job? We have initial screening and identification of needs. We have reemployment assessment plans for each individual participant, and strategic plans up and down the line from national to local to state, and also across local and economic development efforts. But some of the differences are what are quite striking. One is that when it comes to contracting out, in Australia, the contract comes from the national government. In the U.S., it comes from the local workforce investment board. There's 600 of these across the country. And so what that means is that at the U.S. level, these contracts then can include some of the local players in perhaps a more meaningful way, where at the national level, it's the national government who really only understands how that's going to work in their particular area. Now, that's a conjecture. It's something that can be explored more fully. There's also payment for both of these, but for the Australia's payment for performance, for U.S. there's a formula, but some incentives for getting people into jobs. But I think the thing too to see is that even though they both have demand-driven training, and Australia is more at the national level, in the U.S. it's at the local level. The training is with the community colleges. The training is bringing in the local employers, not the National Industry Association, but the local employers, to see and to be sensitive to the needs of those employers at that particular location. And then finally, we have these one-stop career centers. So does Australia. Ours mandate 16 programs under one roof. I'm not quite sure about Australia, but they do have multiple programs. And finally, with the local WIBs in the U.S., we feel that these can offer an opportunity to be a catalyst for integrating economic development and workforce development at the local level, because they're really partners with other organizations. When we ask the local WIB directors, do you see yourself more as an agent of your national program for that local area, or do you see yourself as a local leader who's bringing together resources at the local level to meet your local needs? And they, almost to the person, said, we really see ourselves as a local leader who's bringing together those resources, which was quite interesting. Now in Australia we have the local employment coordinators who also identify the needs and matches employers with education and training facilities there as well. So there's some similarities. Now here I want to spend about 20 minutes to talk about each one of these elements, but Sylvain won't let me. But this is sort of the partnership arrangements, and maybe if there's a copy someplace for you, you can study it on your own. But what the takeaway here is that partnerships are not neat and tidy. It's a messy business. And so what you have are all these different relationships that can happen at the local level. But what it also means is that there's opportunities to bring resources together in a way that can really be meaningful for your local area. You can see how long I dwelled on that. Finally, I want to give you a little, perhaps, optimism about what local partnerships might be able to do. And this is kind of an interesting graph. What this offers is a relationship between the ability to place the participants of our workforce programs into jobs in the U.S. and the number of local workforce investment boards there are in each state. And so each one of these dots is a state. The lower, or the horizontal line, is the number of WIBs within each state. We have one WIB in one state, and we also have 49 WIBs in one state. California has the most WIBs. A state like Rhode Island, which is very small, only has 2 WIBs. But a state like Utah, which is a very big state in terms of geography, only has 1 WIB. It's just a state. So you can see that there's a 10 percentage point difference between a state that only has 1 WIB and a state that then has enough WIBs to really perhaps respond to the local needs of their particular constituents. So something to think about in terms of this relationship. Finally, to conclude, pretty obvious conclusions from our discussion today, but narrowing the gap between demand and supply is a critical challenge. Local flexibility and autonomy can foster partnerships that connect workforce and economic development. Now remember, organizational charts are very nice to put together, but they aren't a guarantee that it's going to work. As I mentioned, that one graph, partnerships can be very messy. But if you have the local flexibility and the local autonomy to make decisions and bring these resources together, you have a better opportunity to really match or meet, I should say, the critical needs of a local area than you do in which many of these decisions are made elsewhere. So with that, I'll conclude. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to say that when we will present to the Irish government the results from this study, we will also bring some of Randall's comparison between other countries and other cases that come from the other countries surveyed. Just in case you don't have time to ask questions to John and Randall this morning, please know that both John and Randall will be in some of the sessions today and tomorrow, so there will be more opportunities on top of the couple of hours that we will spend in coaches. I understand. The forum is a unique network where local practitioners, national civil servants, and also elected representatives come together to share their experience. And we are very pleased to have with us Minister Farry from the Northern Ireland Executive. Minister, thank you very much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here today to share with you the range of ways that my department, the Department for Employment and Learning, and the Northern Ireland Executive have been working with employers and bringing youth into the workplace. From the outset, I want to emphasise that I firmly believe that these two important aspects of government policy and delivery are not mutually exclusive. Indeed, my experience suggests that in order to support young people into sustainable employment, government and its agencies must have an effective strategy of engaging with employers. Before I get into the detail on the approach that my department is taking, it might be useful to provide some context with respect to the Northern Ireland economy. We've been far from immune from the recession that has gripped many of the world's economies. Indeed, official data shows that the recession began earlier in Northern Ireland than the rest of the UK as a whole, and has been consistently deeper and has experienced a much slower recovery and from a lower point. Forecast growth for 2013 is the lowest of the 12 UK regions. However, our economic woes are not purely a result of the global downturn. We have suffered from the same consequences from deindustrialisation as many other Western economies during the 20th century, but given our legacy of division and violence, we have not had the same opportunities as others to restructure. Historically, the Northern Ireland economy has been overly dependent upon the public sector, has experienced high unemployment and economic inactivity, and has been marked by skills deficits. We need to rebalance our economy by growing the private sector, and in particular to increase our exports of goods and services. The Northern Ireland Executive is committed to achieving this, and the recently published economic strategy sets out the pathways and the key themes for our economic success, and skills are a key driver within that strategy. Recognising the importance that skill levels have to the future economic growth of Northern Ireland, in 2011 I published our skills strategy, known as Success Through Skills, Transforming Futures. Fully informed by modelling and forecasting, it highlighted a need for a workforce with higher level qualifications, more focused on science, technology, engineering and mathematics, and with better management and leadership skills. While my department has traditionally focused on the education and training of those going into the workforce and those far from the labour market, it was clear that more needed to be done by way of working with employers to help them to upskill or reskill those already in employment, especially as our evidence pointed to the fact that some 80% of the 2020 workforce was already in work. Connecting with these individuals is therefore vital to economic growth. However, surveys backed by anecdotal evidence show that few employers engaged with government to access training, and many were confused by what help was on offer, both in terms of financial assistance and training provision. To address this issue, the department published its employer engagement plan, outlining how it would work with employers to address both their immediate skill needs and ensure that Northern Ireland demonstrated the skills required to attract economic investment. The plan set out tangible actions to be delivered over an 18-month period. To be truly successful, I and my department have worked to ensure that we listen to the needs of employers, and officials have made themselves available to meet them and to actively deliver solutions to address their needs. A number of key actions included within the plan include the introduction of the Skills Solution Service, a one-stop shop approach to engaging with business to help them upskill and to retrain their staff. This service acts as a response to an issue often raised by small businesses, where they recognise the need to train and develop staff, but find the landscape of provision too complicated and time-consuming. The Skills Solution Service has a team of advisors to help clear a path through all of this for small and medium-sized employers. An advisor will visit the employer and in the first instance will seek to identify what their skill needs really are and to help them to address those needs. The advisors can point the business to funding streams and broker training for the business. A second high-profile and successful development has been our Assured Skills programme. Based on best practice examples from the state of North Carolina, this new way of working brought my department's officials together with those from our Inward Investment and Economic Development Agency, InvestNI. This Assured Skills programme aims to provide assurance to employers that the skills they need to support and grow their businesses are available in Northern Ireland, to reduce risk in the new labour market, and to make new recruits as productive as possible, as quickly as possible. Michael Gould from my department is taking part in a workshop on this approach later, and we'll be happy to discuss assured skills in greater detail. A third major element of this new approach lay in the identification of a number of priority skill sectors. Again, informed by a strong evidence base, my department's employment and skills provision will be increasingly focused on key sectors including ICT, financial services, food and drink processing, advanced manufacturing and engineering, life sciences and the creative industries. This sectoral approach has led to the creation of a number of working groups tasked with producing an action plan which outlines how we will address identified skills gaps and shortages. Importantly, these groups bring together all relevant stakeholders, such as employers, government officials from across different departments, and representatives from our local colleges and universities. This is government and ministers listening to the needs of business and engaging with them directly to provide a coordinated cross-departmental approach to the issues raised. The longest standing of these groups is the ICT Working Group, and this has brought about significant change within the skills landscape. Interventions such as the public sector partnering with the private sector to offer apprenticeships and a software testers academy have only been possible with the buy-in of employers within the sector who have worked with us to provide real employment opportunities together with targeted training. Furthermore, the ICT Career Attractiveness Campaign directed at young people, known as Bring It On, has coincided with significant increases in computer science enrolments at university. Our work on the ICT sector in particular has shown the impact of skill mismatches, especially on our young people. On the one hand, we have quite high levels of youth unemployment, yet on the other, employers within the ICT sector cannot find enough young people with the skills they need. Turning to youth engagement, as you are well aware, the ongoing difficult economic conditions have hit young people particularly hard. In terms of the challenge we are facing, between November 2007 and November 2011, there was an increase of 155% in the numbers of under-25s out of work in Northern Ireland. This was the biggest increase of all UK regions. And furthermore, our overall economic inactivity rate for young people is also the worst for UK regions. In addition, 23% of 16 to 24-year-olds, some 50,000 people, are currently not in education, employment or training, termed NEET. This represents an increase of 29,000 over the last decade. I am determined that in Northern Ireland we will not experience a lost generation. There was no single strategy or ring-fence budget in place to help unemployed young people whenever I assumed office in May of 2011. But responding to this need, my department has developed our Pathways to Success strategy in consultation with key stakeholders, including young people themselves. And to support the strategy, we have now secured a substantial budget of over £25 million over the next 3 financial years. This is a cross-cutting strategy which is underpinned by the belief that young people themselves have a stake and are part of the solution. With this coordinated approach, Pathways to Success provides the framework to help our young people to play a full role in society and to gain the skills our region needs for future economic growth. Specific measures included within the strategy include actions to improve leadership and to ensure a coordinated response by government, the community and voluntary sector and business. Preventative measures such as family support and literacy and numeracy interventions, and age-specific interventions for young people aged 16 to 18 and for those aged 18 to 24. Complementing this work, and in response to the specific impact of the economic downturn on young people, which has seen many young people who would normally have made the transition from education into work in normal economic circumstances now unemployed. I have introduced the Youth Employment Scheme, which is a £31 million package over the next 3 years. On a comparative basis, this is a bigger investment than any other part of the UK. The scheme provides employment and skills incentives to address the issue of youth unemployment. And I know that Jim Russell from my department's employment service will be contributing to one of the workshops tomorrow if you're interested in hearing more about that scheme. Its delivery, would not have been possible without buy-in from employers, and the department has worked hard at the outset to ensure that employers were supportive and willing to provide the opportunities required to make such a scheme a success. Core strands include early intensive diagnosis of employability skills, work experience, flexibly blended with skills training, and a new employer subsidy of up to £5,750 per year. At the heart of the whole initiative is the ethos that young people who are currently unemployed are provided at the earliest possible stage with the skills to gain jobs, compete for jobs created in the future, and to retain employment and to progress in jobs. The focus is to reduce the short-term employment development cycle that many face. While I believe that we are well along the path to developing strategies to support the creation of new jobs and to facilitate essential long-term restructuring of the economy, I believe that there is much to learn from other examples around the world and from experts in the field. I've also recently launched a review of apprenticeships and youth training in Northern Ireland, which will consider the different issues and factors pertaining to apprenticeships and post-school youth training. Its work will be advised by an expert panel, including employers and education and skills providers, supported by a small team of officials, and will take into account the best practice from other jurisdictions. The aim of this review is to ensure that our apprenticeship and youth training provision supports the growth and rebalancing of the Northern Ireland economy, meets the future needs of business by developing a highly skilled workforce, provides consistently high-quality training leading to qualifications which are valued both by young people and by employers, ensures those young people are provided with opportunities to develop the skills and gain the relevant experience, and provides alternative pathways with parity of esteem. I will, of course, also want to set out our broad employment and skills work within the European context going forward, in particular the EU priorities for skills and jobs. I am determined that we will continue to tackle the issue of working with employers and bringing youth into the workforce from a range of angles, not only in terms of measures to upskill the existing workforce, but also focusing on the skills and employment prospects of those coming into the labour market from our education and training systems, and of those who have more barriers to participation, while balancing and taking into account the needs of business and the economy going into the future. I believe that only by engaging effectively with employers can we meet both their short-term requirements and the longer-term needs of economy and society. I truly believe that no government is too big to talk directly with business and to benefit from the economic and social potential the partnership between government, employers and individuals of all ages can deliver. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Fari. Your experience that you just shared does provide a lot of inspiration for our work on youth unemployment and for the discussions that we will continue to have during this forum meeting. So, as anticipated, keep your questions for the long bus ride today and tomorrow. And for the workshops, we will go to the conservatory within this building where lunch will be served. And from the conservatory, we will go directly to the various rooms for the workshop. So bring your things, except for the group G and C on rural and data, where you need to come back earlier in the at the entrance of this building, because these workshops will be held in the health science building, which I suppose is not very far from here. So be back a couple of minutes before 1 at the entrance. Otherwise, from the conservatory to the rooms. And I would like to thank our panel this morning, and let's hope that we will continue discussions on these very interesting topics.